Whether you call it Kveik, Kvik, or Kvike, there's no denying that this unique Norwegian yeast has had a remarkable impact on the brewing scene, and Imperial Yeast's A43 Loki is one of the best versions out there. With the ability to produce a clean beer when fermented as warm as 104 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius, you heard that right, while also performing well at more standard ale temperatures, Imperial Yeast A43 Loki is as versatile as it gets, meaning you have zero excuses for failing to brew throughout the year. Learn more about A43 Loki at imperialyeast.com and grab a pouch for your next batch to see what all the fuss is about. It was a crisp winter morning in January of 2003 when I was introduced to the idea of brewing beer at home. A colleague at the Bellingham group home we worked at came in late, blamed it on the fact he was bottling his homebrew. We spent the better part of that shift talking about his beloved hobby, and on my way home that evening, I picked up a starter kit at the local shop which included one of 4 different extract with steeping grains recipes. I chose a style I'd yet to hear of at the time, but has become come to hold a very special place in my heart. Irish Red Ale.
Yeah, I love Irish red ales. I don't know if I've mentioned on the podcast before, but I spent my last semester in college in Spain. And one of my favorite memories was we had a buddy and his wife come and visit us. They were from the United States, and they visited us during St. Patrick's Day. So we were drinking Murphy's Irish Red all during St. Patrick's Day. And we drank way too much. There were all kinds of fun shenanigans, but that's actually one of my most favorite drinking memories from Spain.
And Murphy's makes a great Irish Red Ale. We're going to talk about some commercial examples later. Well, based on the stories I've heard from others, I consider myself relatively fortunate because that first batch of beer actually turned out to be pretty good, at least enough to keep me in the hobby. Well, since then, I've brewed many batches of Irish Red Ale and have had the opportunity to drink the real deal in Ireland. I absolutely love the stuff, and I look forward to digging into this classic style as well as the results of my attempt to brew one using less than classic methods. All right, if you like what we're up to and want us to keep doing it, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy. By committing to a small monthly pledge over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Our guest for this month, June of 2021, is Mike Myers from Root Shoot Malting, a craft maltster based out of Loveland, Colorado, who's not only producing world-class malts, but playing a huge role in the overall rise in craft malt in the American brewing scene. Mike is a great guy who, in addition to his knowledge about malt, absolutely loves brewing and beer. To be a part of this session, you have to become a patron at the $3 tier or higher by Friday, June 25th, 2021, which will also give you access to all past sessions with guests like John Palmer, Michael Tonsmeyer, Dr. Tom Shellhammer, John Kimmich from The Alchemist, and many, many more. To check out all of the other rewards you can get for helping us do what we do, head over to patreon.com/Brewlosophy. Feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who have an array of amazing purpose-built stainless brewing products to improve your brew day. If you're looking for a high-quality pilot brewery, make sure to check out the gorgeous BH15 single-tier system, which comes with a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Head over to brewershardware.com to see what they're all about, and make sure to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Listener Keith Brogum wrote in with a funny story related to our recent episode where we discussed stainless hop spiders. He said, "The funniest thing happened when I was brewing a Mexican lager today. I just started the boil on my Robo Brew and thought to myself, I'm brewing a light lager, not a lot of hops. I'm not going to use my hop spider today. What's the worst that can happen? Maybe you can see where I'm going with this. I was listening to the podcast, and as one episode ended, the next one automatically started. It was about using a stainless steel hop spider. And in one of the most serendipitous moments of my life, you started talking about how the pump could clog up. Right as my pump clogged up. Too surreal. I'm definitely going to be using it every batch going forward. I think you were mentioning that the micron differences are typically 300 and 400 micron, but there's actually an 800 micron spider designed for the all-in-one systems. Like Andy was saying, the 300 and 400 micron spiders are usually too fine, and the hops can start overflowing with those ones. The 800 micron spider works great for me. Thanks again for the entertaining and thoughtful content." Well, thank you, Keith, for writing in with that really funny story. It is kind of serendipitous feeling. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, talk about timing. I've definitely clogged a pump before. Usually whenever I'm using whole cone hops, that's not fun when you accidentally like suck a cone up in there and that clogs the pump. But that actually, so it happened one time to me, and I had so much trouble taking the pump apart to unclog it that I ended up throwing that pump away. And so now anytime I'm replacing a pump or getting a new pump, I always make sure that thing is easy to disassemble for cleaning, but also just in case that there's a clog. But yeah, I mean, I need to get a couple of hop spiders. I think I'm gonna add that to my shopping list here soon.
Yeah, like I was saying in that episode, I actually bought a hop spider as I was prepping for that show. I thought to myself, why am I not using one? Well, I didn't have one of the bigger ones. I had one of the smaller ones. But you know, the funny thing, the only pump that I've ever actually used in my brewery, which was years ago, was a chugger pump, which was big enough. I think the head on that one is big enough to handle, small hop particulates. So I've never clogged a pump. But I'll tell you, if I was using one of these smaller Robo Brew or Grainfather type systems, absolutely, I would use a hop spider just out of concern for one, clogging the pump, but also I would imagine it would make it a lot easier to clean. So, well, thank you for the feedback, Keith. If you have show feedback, you could send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. Listener Zach Otting sent me a bunch of beers, one of which was a bourbon barrel aged Russian Imperial Stout that he brewed with his club, the Cincinnati Malt Infusers. Well, he took 5 gallons of that beer on his own and aged it on 2 pounds of toasted coconut and a couple vanilla beans once it was in the keg. I may not be the biggest fan of adjunct beers, but I do love me some coconut, so I was stoked to share this one with my friends.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
You come to my senses like a beer in the forest. I love you, Timmy Tim.
I love you too, George Bird. It's very, it's dark.
If I was on the guillotine and they're like, this razor will fall and cut your head off unless one person in the entire world can tell what kind of beer this is, I'd pick you, Timmy.
Your head is coming off.
And then I'd be dead.
It's a dark stout.
It is dark. So it's going to be a stout or a stout or a stout. Is a Guinness a type? No, it's a stout or a Guinness.
It's good. That's what it is. It is good. God damn, that's good. It's got good, like a roasty coffee.
Roasty coffee.
And I want like maple almost.
Maple roasty coffee.
No, like plum.
Plum roasted maple coffee.
Yes.
I hope we hit on all those flavors.
It's good. It's got a lot of flavors going on.
I can't nail down any of those things. It smells and tastes like a barley wine, man.
I don't think it is.
What do you think it is then?
I said it was like a stout.
Okay, let's go with stout.
The only reason, like the barley wines usually warm my face more.
It is good. What were all the things that you said? Coffee, roasted, maple.
Nah, I'm taking the maple back.
I do taste a little maple.
Tell us what it tastes like.
Coconut.
No. Hey, well, I'm gonna, as soon as I take a sip,
Okay,
all I'm gonna taste is coconut.
That's coconut. No, I don't get coconut. I hate coconut.
I'm trying to get coconut. I can't get coconut. I get chocolate.
Yeah.
But like a coffee burned stout. Obviously, it's got to be a stout, right?
It's very good. I'm going with a 8.
Forget the ratings for a second. Do you like it?
I do.
Okay, the person who made this beer, Tim, likes your beer.
I do.
I like this beer. The 2 most important people in the history of beer reviewing like your beer.
You want to guess what this beer tasted like? Coconut. I was laughing so hard on the inside when even after telling the guys that it was made with coconut, neither of them detected it. And the fact Tim loved the beer so much while hating coconut was hilarious to me.
See, I'm like Tim. I'm not a huge fan of coconut. I really don't like coconut flavored beers. Hold on, let me take that back. We did one at Blue Owl, which was called Tiki Hop Totem, which was a sour milkshake IPA with coconut and pineapple, and that thing was phenomenal. But otherwise, I've had Russian Imperial Stouts with coconut and stuff. I just don't like them. But plum roasted. Or like roasted plum maple coffee. That sounds good. Like I like now I'm like, oh, because I always do this double, the Belgian double in the fall. And now I'm thinking, ooh, maybe I want to switch it up this year and do some roasted plums with maple in a stout. And so this may have spurred a new beer for me to try out this fall.
Well, that actually sounds really nice. I liked your idea of the I know you make that annual double with plums. That sounds really good. I didn't get much plum from Zach's beer. I have a feeling. I commented at one point to Tim while we were drinking somebody else's Imperial Stout that it had a pruny character to it. And I wonder if that's not what he was picking up, maybe from some of the darker malts. I don't know. But to me, it just tasted like an Almond Joy. I mean, it was absolutely delicious. So thank you for sending that and all of the other beers in, Zach. We really appreciate it. Now, real quick, in a recent episode, the guys reviewed a Wee Heavy by a guy named Matt, and that was all of the information I had on him. Well, after hearing the review, Matthew Wright of Visalia, California, shot me an email saying it was his beer. Now, for those out there who might be unfamiliar with the Central Valley of California, Visalia is about 45 minutes south of my house. I mean, it's not very far away. And Matt reminded me that he's the guy who I remotely opened my garage for while I was out of town so that he could drop his beer off in my garage. Unfortunately, I've yet to meet Matt in person, but I'm sure it'll happen soon. I sure hope it does, actually. And I hope it involves beer he brewed, because that Wee Heavy was money. So thanks to Matt Wright of Visalia, California for that Wee Heavy he sent in a couple weeks ago. All right, if you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage you feel like sending in reviewed on the show, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. When we return from this break, the focus will be on Irish Red Ale. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. There's no question that the most popular styles of beer these days are those that pack a walloping punch of hops, which has led to less hop-forward styles being pushed to the background. As much as I love a good hoppy IPA, this bums me out a bit, as I love beers that emphasize malt character, one of my favorites being Irish Red Ale.
Yeah, Irish Red Ale is definitely a good one for me. It's up there as one of the beers that I like to drink the most. It's probably not the top of the list, but it's definitely up there. But yeah, I generally prefer malty beers. I mean, I like hoppy beers. Don't get me wrong. I'll drink IPAs and stuff, and I'll enjoy them. But malty beers are kind of like, I don't know why. I just like them. Maybe it's because I've got a really bad sweet tooth, and so like it just reminds me of drinking sugar or something. I think I mentioned on the one where we talked about beer and health that sugar and beer are kind of my two vices. So maybe that's why I like malty beers better. But this one is, but Irish Red Ale is, I shared at the top of the show whenever I was in Spain drinking that one. And that was kind of my first experience with it, which was really cool. I also got to try it in Ireland and one of the things that I was studying abroad in Spain, and there was an Irish guy who I got to know really well there. And I was asking him, "Hey, where do I go, for a good meal for a good meal in Ireland?" And he said, "Oh, you just go to a pub." And I was like, "Well, okay, wait, why?" And he was like, "Well, you can have beer." And I was like, "Beer's not a meal." And he goes, "Yeah, it is." And that's what he was talking about. It was talking about Guinness Stout and this Irish Red Ale, which is kind of funny because at least whenever I was there, and I don't know about you, Marshall, but I never saw, you have Murphy's Red, and then some other stuff, but like Smithwick's is like the big one there for me. And
if you called it Smithwick's, if you're in Ireland, you're going to get laughed at. They call it Smithwick's.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and that was hands down the most popular, probably the most popular beer outside of Guinness, at least in my experience. It was everywhere you went, and it was absolutely delicious. I do believe, like a lot of the popular beers here in America, I do believe most of the commercial Irish red ales found, on tap in Ireland right now are probably owned by big conglomerates. But that notwithstanding, these beers are really good. I loved Murphy's. I had a ton of Murphy's while I was there, a ton of Smithwick's. Guinness has their own, red amber ale as well. Absolutely delicious. The neat thing about Irish red ale, I called it classic earlier. That's because it has roots way back. It's an old style.
Yeah. Irish red ale is a really old style. You can kind of think about it. It's kind of hard, right? Like these styles sometimes become so old that they don't have really like good history, describing it. But I guess maybe the best way for me to describe it is the way this Irish guy explained it to me. He said, beer was consumed in Ireland for sure. Like it was consumed for hundreds of years, but beer was mostly what you drank in between like shots of spirits,
The palate cleanser, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the palate cleanser. It's the thing that you did. And this is his quote. I still remember this to the day. He said something like, "You'll be in a bad way if you turn up pissed at home." Right. And I always remember the way he said that. Like, yeah, all right, I don't want to end up drunk. So you can't just drink spirits all day. You've got to sip beer in between the spirits. And that was just sort of described to me the ethos of like Irish beer drinking. But this Irish red ale too. The reason I brought up Smithwick's is because Smithwick's doesn't say red anywhere on the label or the packaging. And if you see it anywhere on tap in Ireland, it doesn't say red, like, right? When you pour the beer, it's clearly like it looks red,
yeah,
but they don't call it red. There's just like, at least it was my experience whenever I was in Ireland, there were 3 beers that were generally on tap in every bar. And that was Guinness, some version of Murphy's or Smithwick's, or, some version of what we're going to call a red ale, and then a British pale ale like Bass or something like that. Right. And so, but that was it. It's pale dark and then the in between. Right. And that's where, I kind of like look at this style as, we can talk about like where the style came from and what it is. But really, like, that seems to me the simplest explanation of how this style came to be is it's like, we've got pale, we got dark, we need something in the middle.
Yeah, I think that's how a lot of beer styles come to be, right? Like, this is a little rich, this one's a little light, let's make something in the middle. It makes sense. My understanding is that, in Ireland, they were kind of copying the what was going on. Not copying, that sounds like I'm minimizing the wonderful brewing history of Ireland, but that they were taking hints from their neighbors to the south in the UK, and were kind of that Irish red ale was really just an English bitter, kind of their version of an English bitter with minor changes and such, and that's kind of how it presents itself too. To me, again, this is personal opinion here, but Irish red ale does tend to have maybe a tad more sweetness and just a hint less toastiness, I guess. Though I always expect a bit of toasty, kind of nutty character in a good Irish red ale. My understanding, again, I could be off on this, is that Killian's was really the brewer that really brought this style to life. They were kind of the first to market it. And the funny thing is back when they did that, I believe they called it Killian's Red Ale. It was an ale. But nowadays, if you go to the store and you buy a 6-pack of Killian's Red, it's a lager. So somewhere along the line, I believe Killian's got bought out by a big conglomerate, and they just started making red versions of easy drinking lagers, and that's what they call it nowadays. So.
Yeah. I mean, I'll take a little issue there because I have seen a bunch of stuff written about this. Nothing that I've ever independently verified, but Killian's was a new thing as of like the 1980s, I believe, and it was when Miller Coors bought a brewery that was located in Ireland, and they had this recipe for a red ale. Again, it wasn't called red; it was just an ale that they brewed in Ireland, and then Miller Coors marketed it as Killian's Irish Red, and then I understand, I don't have any information about this, but my understanding is then they started just changing the recipe to make it where you can mass produce it and started doing it a lager fermentation so it's cleaner and stuff. I would say these days that Killian's Irish Red doesn't taste to me like an Irish Red tastes. Killian tastes like an amber lager, I guess. To me,
no, I 100% agree. I actually quite like it, but it does not.
I do
taste
too.
like
Yeah,
an Irish
of course.
red ale. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it's more like Killian's is more like those like American amber ales, or and not like light, clean, with a little bit of hops, but not a whole lot. But that recipe, and like you said, it's kind of sweet on the side, right? Like it has hops, but it's definitely malty and sweet. Not as sweet as like a Scottish shilling ale, or certainly like a wee heavy, but it's sweet enough. And there's a little bit of history that came into that too, which I think is really fascinating. And so from what I've read, in the late 1770s, the British government essentially stopped import of foreign hops and put high taxes on British hops. So the Irish and the Scots just decided, okay, screw you. I'm not going to put hops in my beer. And so they started making these like sweeter beers. And I, that's kind of where that historically this style comes from. But like you said, sort of malty balanced with a little bit of hops. And I love the first line in the BJCP guidelines. It just says an easy drinking pint.
Yeah, and it is. It is. It's an easy drinking pint. I mean, that's probably one of the better descriptions there is for this style.
Right? Exactly. But, I mean, if we're talking about, style description and stuff, so appearance, I mean, I think is a really important one. For this one, it is red, right? It's that red, deep copper. It's not brown, and it's certainly not black, and not Guinness, and it's not pale either. It's not like a light, English pale ale.
Right.
And another thing too, it's not like ruby highlights. I've talked about that a bunch on other styles, where you can kind of like shine and get some like reddish hues to the flavor. No, this is like red. I mean, it's that deep copper color that's sort of right in the middle of the beer spectrum, and looks really beautiful.
Yeah, one of the I've kind of have this affinity for like red amber ales, and Irish Red Ale just hits all the marks in terms of appearance for me. It's clear, it's not too dark. You can see through it, but it's got this beautiful red color, which comes from the use of certain grains, which we'll talk about. To me, on the aroma, when we're talking about the aroma of this type of beer, I get kind of an interesting in my favorite styles. And again, I was lucky enough to have been in Ireland right before COVID started, a couple months before COVID started. And so I was drinking this stuff daily. And regardless of the producer, whether it was Murphy's or Smithwick's or whatever, there's this nice, it's like this blend of toasty, nutty-ish kind of, but then I get this kind of fruity, like almost cherry character out of it. And that may be biased because it's red, but I love it. And it's that aromatic piece of it is what it's so inviting to me. It makes me want to drink that pint.
Yeah. I would say maybe like stone fruit. Cherry's a really good example, right? Stone fruit, that ester, the profile that comes from so many British and Anglo-European ales.
Oh, right.
Maybe that's what you're tasting too. And that's a lot. That's there too. And then there's also that really unique, Maris Otter floor malted base grain flavor that comes out of these, that like biscuity cheddar cracker. I mean, there's caramel and there's toffee. I mean, it's a sweet beer. It's not like cloying. Again, it's not as sweet as if you've had a shilling ale or a wee heavy from Scotland. Those are much more like caramel and toffee than this one. But the hops are present there, and maybe that also contributes a little bit to that sort of cherry flavor that you're getting, because those hops are generally like earthy and herbal. They're not bright, citrusy, piney, resinous, dank hops. They're just kind of like earthy and herbal, and they're there just to do a job of balancing the malt enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing about Irish Red Ale, like other kind of British Isles, classic ales from there, is that there can be hints of, I hate to say this because we often associate diacetyl with as being an off flavor, but there can be kind of a buttery character to it. Now, I don't like that. If ever I think I have a fairly a high threshold for it. So when I taste it, it's usually pretty strong. And so I'm not a fan of that. I do believe, we've talked about this, I believe we talked about it in our off flavor episode, that there are certain ingredients you can use that give the impression of kind of buttered toast. And to me, Maris Otter and, Golden Promise type of grains, those types of malts can do that. They create this impression of a full, rich, buttery, I put that in air quotes, buttery characteristic. And Maris Otter in particular, for me, I get kind of a peanut butter character from it when it's used in high amounts. And that to me is quintessential aspect of the flavor of a good Irish red ale, is that kind of nutty, peanut buttery, blended with some sweetness, which may or may not come from the use of caramel malt, like you said, Cade. Back then, I believe they were taxing caramel malts, or it was difficult to get those in because it was so expensive. And so they were relying on other grains historically to amplify that malt sweetness, and again, a part of that was not using as much hops, and so you've got that malt wort sweetness really balanced by a kind of lower alpha acid classic UK hops.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, like Crisp, Simpsons, all those base malts that come from the UK, they're really characterful base malts. Like, well, I say really characterful, maybe more characterful than most like American two-row pale malts, right? And like you said, it's got those like peanut butter, nice flavors that present there too. And right. You don't have to have caramel and toffee. Again, you're not trying to get like cloyingly sweet. You're not trying to make a sweet beer. I kind of think of it as like, hey, we've got this, barley that we can grow, and we're fairly familiar with our like floor malting traditions here in Ireland and Anglo-Europe. How can we make a beer that looks kind of red, that tastes kind of nice, it's got a little hop balance, but isn't dark like stout, and it's not light like these British beers that we're having to import. And to me, that just sort of like makes it where you've got this like style. This style is born, just like, people just drinking beer and thinking what they want in a beer. And it's that also brings me to, right, like roasted barley and those dark grains are a big part of Irish beer. I mean, Absolutely. You think of like Guinness. I mean, Guinness Stout, that has a huge contingent of, black patent malt or roasted barley or whatever, whatever recipe you're using for Guinness, but that roasted barley was like something that they had available because they're making stouts. So throw in a little handful of this and suddenly you've got this beautiful red color that comes from a malt and a little bit of roasty bitterness, which also balances that malt flavor.
Yeah, the use of roasted barley is an interesting thing for me. I remember, as I was kind of getting obsessed with brewing, you start to kind of dig into different ideas and such. And one of the things a lot of people used to do, at least, I'm not sure how common it is these days, is, use a little bit of roasted barley just for color adjustment, right? I've actually messed around non-experimentally, so this is anecdote, but I've messed around with that, and I swear that even 2% roasted barley, which is about what you need to get kind of an orangish red color, it imparts character, like noticeable, perceptible character to beer. And in my opinion, that is what you want in an Irish red ale. You're not just making an ale that's red. You're making an ale that happens to be red, but also tastes different than a pale version of that same beer. And that small amount of roasted barley, which, to my understanding, largely the color of an Irish red ale comes from that use of a small amount of roasted barley, but it's also contributing some flavor,
Yeah, exactly. And you hit the nail on the head there. That is a defining characteristic of Irish red ale, is that use of like that slightly roasted grain, right? Roasted barley or black patent or something. I think more commonly unmalted roasted barley being used, but that brings you to the flavor of the beer, and that's bitterness, right? That bitterness is a big part of an Irish red. And I think that's the part that is often underdone. Whenever I've seen examples of Irish reds here in the United States, they're these like sweet, sticky messes sometimes, or they're like a thick body. And that's because they didn't get the bitterness right. Now, bitterness can come from hops, but it can also come, like you said, from the use of roasted barley. Now, I'm not talking about throwing in like a pound of roasted barley into this thing, because clearly that's not going to do what you want.
That's a stout.
But exactly. But like you said, throw in a few ounces, 2% 10% of the grist, and suddenly you've got this red beer with some nice roasty, bitter characteristics that balances that malty sweetness, and you've got a really easy drinking pint.
Exactly. Easy drinking pint. That's exactly it. And, I like that you comment on the bitterness, because I trust that what you're saying isn't that these are bitter beers. They're not. In fact, they're characteristically less bitter than a lot of other styles of beer. But in order to avoid that sickly, sweet, cloying, kind of sticky in your mouth character, you do have to balance that bitterness properly. And according to the BJCP, your international bittering units, the IBU, can fall anywhere between 18 and 28, which that's a lot of leeway. I would tend to stick, in my experience, I like to be around that 24 IBU mark typically for an Irish red ale, because I do feel like that also, that bitterness, even though it's not perceptibly, like an IPA bitter, it does encourage kind of this dryness, this dryness in the finish, which in terms of mouthfeel is one of the things you kind of expect from a beer like this. So the flavor and even the aroma has kind of a sweet character to it, and yet you can drink pint after pint because it doesn't feel like you're drinking sugar water.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, those, we've talked about Murphy's and Smithwick's, and there's some other ones like Franciscan Well, I think, does one, which was popular in Ireland. But all of those beers have a nice dry finish, exactly like you said.
Yeah.
And I think that, like you said, that's the point, right? We've got this bitterness and this slightly dry character from the roasted barley and from the English hops, or from the British hops, and that gives you this just really nice, really pleasant, drinkable, not rounded, because again, it's balanced to the malt, but
right.
But slightly bitter, and really just crushable beer, which you can drink between shots of whiskey.
Happily so.
Happily.
We've talked a bit about already some of the ingredients. Obviously, Maris Otter is going to be a classic starting point, but really any pale ale malt that kind of favors that biscuity characteristic. You're looking at roasted barley. You can absolutely use crystal and caramel malts, though a lot of people don't go that route, and you can get away with it. And actually, again, by not doing that, in my experience, you do tend to get a little bit more of that drier finish, which I prefer. English hops, we're talking East Kent Goldings, it can be Progress, you can use Fuggles, stuff like that. In terms of yeast, this is an interesting one, because there are so many wonderful English, yeast that are origins are in that area, the UK, but so many different varieties. And I have a feeling that the brewers over there obviously are all going to have their own proprietary yeast that they bank themselves. What are your thoughts on different the yeast that you would use to ferment this style?
Yeah, so I like the Irish ale strains that are out there. I mean, I like Darkness from Imperial. I like the Irish ale strains that are from the other labs, White Labs and Y Yeast. I like those in this style. Low esters. So I'm okay with some, like you said, cherry or some stone fruit esters. But in an Irish red, again, you're looking to not have anything sort of offend the senses, I guess, right? Yeah. So you're not looking for like a huge estery thing like you might in like a British mild or something, right? That's going to have more esters than the Irish red. You're looking for just sort of clean, slightly estery, and so really any of those styles. And I do like, I know it's called Darkness, but I do like Darkness in an Irish red. Yeah,
I like Darkness in a lot of styles. It's funny because there's early on, certain labs kind of named certain strains after where they originated, and I feel like that kind of stuck in people's heads as like, well, then you got to use that if you're going to make a beer from, say, England, English ale or whatever it is. I like how Imperial has kind of moved away from that, so they call with the Fuller strain, which is a classic English ale strain, they just call it Pub, and I have used that strain for so many different beers, one of which has been a couple of Irish red ales that I've made over the years. It is phenomenal, and if you restrain your fermentation temperature a bit, or you keep your firm temp down a little bit, you can restrain that ester development, and it makes an absolutely beautiful Irish red ale. You can actually get away with using quote unquote American yeasts. Yeast are yeast. Yes, some are a little more clean than others, but you can still coax out certain characteristics if you use them properly. So what you don't want to use obviously is like a Saison strain or like or a Belgian strain or something like that.
Yeah.
That's going to favor the phenolic development. That is absolutely inappropriate in this style. Now, another thing just to point out, there is a level of diacetyl that can be appropriate in this style. I avoid it at all costs, but there are strains that you can find that will that have a tendency to produce a slight level of diacetyl as well. And in terms of mouthfeel, that can leave kind of a slickness in your mouth. I don't like that at all, so I would just avoid that at all costs. But before we get into talking about kind of traditional brewing processes for Irish Red Ale, let's just go over some of the statistics for this. We talked about IBU being between 18 and 28. In terms of color, you're looking at 9 to 14 SRM. That is red, in my opinion, for pretty much any style. OG can range anywhere between 1036 and 1046. This is not a heavy hitting style. This is a nice, quaffable, easy drinking ale. FG can be anywhere from 1010 to 1014, typically, according to the BJCP, which puts you in a range of 3.8 to 5% ABV. I really enjoy most of my English and Irish ales to kind of be in that 4.5% ABV range.
Yeah, 4.5 or 5, that kind of level. I don't really like low 4s just because I feel like I need a little bit more body from the alcohol, in an Irish red. But again, like I said, this style is meant to be drank and quaffed, so you're not trying to get crushed by it,
right?
Or end up pissed, as my Irish friend would say. so yeah, like you said, lightly bitter, nice red color. And on the low end of ABV, but normal.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go through a kind of a traditional brewing process for this style. I feel like the way that home brewers, especially, and even professional brewers here in America brew these days was largely based on the way things were being done in the UK for a while. So it's the traditional brewing process for an Irish red ale isn't really that different than what you might do in your garage. In terms of water chemistry, I know a lot of people like to favor calcium chloride, higher chloride levels to kind of encourage a malt roundness. To me, I refer to the characteristic that I get from a high chloride beer as being warming. It's like a malt warmth, almost like you pulled fresh muffins out of the oven and you're eating that. And that does work very, very well in an Irish red ale, in my opinion. And that is what I have tended to do as well, is kind of a little bit more higher chloride than sulfate.
Yeah, I was going to say just slightly higher chloride. I'm not talking about like a hazy style where you're doing like 3 times the chloride, like slightly higher. If you're at 50 parts per million, maybe 75 parts per million chloride, just something slightly on that. That's kind of where I'm at. But, to be honest with you, I don't really do much with my water chemistry as long as it's fairly balanced, right? Mm-hmm. If you've got something that's way out of control, like your sulfate is like way high for some reason, then yeah, balance it with chloride. But for me, it's more just getting it sort of balanced. And if you use that balanced water profile, you should be okay with an Irish ale.
Yep. I agree with you on that one. In terms of a mash, we're looking at your standard 60-minute mash, probably, somewhere around the 154, 155 degree Fahrenheit mark, which is right around 67, 68 C. If you really want to drive that dryness or maybe increase your ABV, you could go lower. But this is one of those styles that you can do, kind of a mid-range mash temperature. I feel like that's pretty common. Same thing with the boil. You're looking at 60-minute boil. You add your hops at all the normal times. Nothing special about that. You're going to chill it as quickly as possible to get that nice cold break, and then ferment it with like we mentioned before, a nice English ale strain. Maybe not something that's hyper ester, is going to produce too much esters, but something that's relatively clean, though still English, notably, I think works really well. I like a fermentation temperature for this one right around 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19 C. Surprise, surprise. That's kind of my go-to. But I found that when you're using English ale strains that do tend to produce some esters, that can kind of keep it restrained, and I just prefer that in a good Irish red ale.
Yeah, same with me. All of that the same, from the mash all the way through the boil, and fermentation. And just normal ale temperatures, 66 degrees Fahrenheit. Like you said, not a high ester producing strain, and like Juice or London Ale 3, those are ones I would stay away from if you're doing a Murphy's Irish Ale. But otherwise, you've got a lot of flexibility. I mean, shoot, even Chico would be fantastic in a Irish ale. So yeah, just sort of normal standard fermentation profile. And then I would say for, fining and packaging, same thing, right? You're just kind of doing your normal fining and packaging procedure, maybe a little bit undercarbonated from an American style, like 2.2 or 2.3 volumes. But this beer can be carbonated. I mean, I had plenty of examples. I had one really good casked ale, casked Irish red ale in Spain. That one was fantastic. So obviously that one was very not very carbonated at all and served around room temperature, which was great and tasted fantastic. But you can also carbonate this one a decent bit too, right? Like, don't be afraid to get a little foam and a little carbonation in there.
Absolutely. In terms of you mentioned fining a bit or filtration, the appearance of this beer. This is one of those styles, and I know people will kind of get up in arms about this. This is one of those styles that really should be clear. If it's not clear, it looks muddy. That's been my experience. And so back in the olden days in the UK, that's where they were using isinglass in firkins, and the reason they did that was to clarify their beer. I'm a big fan of gelatin. If you have a filter, you can run it through a filter, but get this beer clear. It's beautiful when it's clear and you can see through it. I feel like that's pretty important. And like you said, I'm not a big fan of the whole, I feel like people don't talk about carbonation and English styles need to be undercarbed. That whole thing came from them, pulling beers, from a cellar. I mean, yes, it's still like that when you go over there if you get it off of a beer engine. But if you're getting a beer straight off the tap, I had both styles. I had Murphy's Irish Red in Doolin, in fact, this beautiful little pub in Doolin, Ireland, that was off cask and it was delicious. But then I had it off of in another pub right off the tap, and it was much more carbonated and still delicious. So do it works for you. I do think traditionally you're going to find it probably served either out of the cask, and I've even had some Irish Red Ale served on nitro that's really, really nice as well. It kind of mimics that cask character. So, all right. So that's how you're going to kind of traditionally brew a Irish Red Ale. What is it that you look for specifically, Cade, in a good example of Irish Red Ale? I feel like we've already hit on some things. One of them being that it's more malty yet not cloyingly sweet. Would you say that that's a good characterization of an Irish Red Ale?
Absolutely. I would throw in bitterness, right? Like a malty balanced by bitterness, right? And not as much by like a strong hop presence. The hops are kind of playing a backbone, playing second fiddle. Ooh, there's a nice Texas reference for everybody. So the bitterness being what keeps the malt in check and finishing dry.
Yeah, and we were talking a little bit about ingredients earlier. One thing that I forgot to point out is that that you've got all these English hops, but you've got some. If you live here in the States or in North America at least, that you've got access to domestic versions of English inspired or even English hops. Something like Willamette works really well for this style, and that's a really inexpensive domestic kind of Englishy style variety of hops. But you can get away with that because this isn't a hop forward beer. I mean, I have a feeling you could probably make a pretty passable Irish Red Ale with something like, Warrior, just to bitter it a little bit.
Oh yeah.
But yeah. I do tend to like more of that earthy. My go-to is always Fuggles. I'm not a big fan of EKG, East Kent Gold Ale. I never have been. It's too marmaladey to me, and I'm not a big fan of marmalade. So I like Fuggles, which I know other people hate, which gives, you think about it, you've got this nice kind of sweet, malty beer balanced with kind of a mushroomy, earthy thing that you get from those Fuggles. And to me, that just works out beautifully.
Yeah, Fuggles is a great one. Any real English hop, and I love that you brought up Willamette because that was one I was going to mention as well too. That's the one that I use whenever I've brewed an Irish Red Ale, is Willamette. I use that, but Fuggles would be great. EKG, I love EKG, so I'm happy with that one too. But yeah, any of those hops are great. But again, the hops are just there to sort of give you a little bit of character to go with to match that maltiness. And then one thing I almost forgot to mention is that roasted presence from that little bit of roasted barley is also really important in there as well.
Yeah, there's a reason it's in the beer, and I like to think that it's the Irish Red Ale is red because they found that using a bit of roasted barley added a nice flavor and characteristic to the beer, and we got lucky because that beautiful red beer is now what we get to drink. Well, if you're out there looking for a good commercial example to drink, try to find some Smittix, some Murphy's, some Kilkenny, some O'Hara's is absolutely delicious as well. Any of those, especially if they're fresh-ish, are going to give you a good example of what to expect in a good Irish Red Ale. Well, it'd been over a year since I'd had a nice one on tap, so as I was started designing a recipe, I figured I'd cut a few corners to reduce my brew day time. How did it turn out? Results when we're back from this break. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the brew bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the brew bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a brew bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all-grain beer in a single, compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Unlike some styles, Irish Red Ale isn't necessarily one known for being terribly difficult to brew. We kind of talked about that earlier, and it's probably why it's one of the styles commonly recommended for new brewers. That's kind of my hunch. That first batch that I ever made with extract took just over 2 hours for me to finish brewing, and I wanted to see what would happen if I made an all-grain version in about the same amount of time. I was using my full volume brew in a bag SS Brewtech 1V electric system for this one, and I started brewing at 10:45 a.m. It started by collecting the full volume of water that was run through an RV filter. I just do that for every beer that I make because I don't like chlorine in my beer. And then I added unmeasured amounts of both calcium and chloride and gypsum. Seeing as this was an Irish Red Ale and, that's a malt forward style, I did add a bit more calcium chloride in hopes of boosting that malt roundness. Again, short and shoddy. These were unmeasured. I just poured off little bits in my hand, kind of trying to remember the impact that other, water chemistry adjustments have had in the past. And so I do believe that I got a pretty high, well, not high, but the ratio of chloride to sulfate, there was more chloride. So I think that was a solid move. Cade, so far so good?
Yeah, so far so good. And I love that this is a style that was probably really forgiving of that. Oh, I added some calcium chloride and some sulfate, right? So this is what I said earlier about the water chemistry. I think as long as you're just kind of in a ballpark range between the two of them and not overly favoring one or the other, You're probably going to be just fine with this one.
Yeah. So the grain bill for this one, this is where things get a little bit curious. I started with 85% Maris Otter. Now, I had a sack of Maris Otter that I bought from a professional brewing friend of mine 2 years ago, and I'd used about half the sack, and I didn't put it in one of my Vittles vaults, so I just rolled the top down and kind of stuck it in a corner, and then I kind of forgot about it. It was only when I brewed this beer, there it is. Might as well use the Maris Otter. This is an Irish Red Ale. But then on top of that, I use 9% Mecca grade Metolius, which is a Munich style malt. Not traditional in this, but I thought, Metolius is known for imparting a nice graham cracker character. And I thought, what better to add to an Irish Red Ale than a bit of that graham crackery goodness. So I use 9% of that, of Metolius, 5% medium UK crystal malt, and 1% roasted barley. Again, you want that color plus that whatever, extra special characteristics that roasted barley is going to add. So that's 85% Maris Otter, 9% Metolius, 5% medium UK crystal, which I believe is about 55 Levabond, and 1% roasted barley.
Yeah, a really interesting grain bill. The Munich there, I like that, especially with Metolius. I don't know that I would use sort of another Munich malt there, but that graham cracker flavor is fantastic from Metolius. But yeah, I mean, I like it. Again, this is short and shoddy Irish Red Ale, so let's do it.
Exactly. I just wanted to see what would happen, and I had all these things lying around. So when the water was to strike temperature, I dropped the bag of grains into it and stirred to incorporate before checking to ensure I hit my target mash temperature of, it was supposed to be 154, it was about 155 Fahrenheit or 68 C. In my mind at the time, I'm thinking it's only going to be held there for 25 minutes, which is the entire mash length was only 25 minutes. So the temp wasn't going to drop too much, probably going to result in a slightly higher FG, but again, who cares? So after that 25-minute mash rest, I pulled the grains out and let them drip into the kettle while the wort was heating up. I gave the grain bag a bit of a squeeze just to get to my pre-boil volume. When the wort reached a boil, I added 15 grams of Fuggles, and then I also tossed in 10 grams of Magnum, given the fact that we're only doing a 20-minute boil, and I did want this beer to have balanced bitterness so as not to come across as too sweet. So that's the only reason I use that Magnum. If I was doing a non-short and shoddy version of this, I would never have added the Magnum. But again, that was a 14% AA Magnum, I believe, so it really helped with that bitterness, that isomerized alpha acid bitterness. And then I added 21 grams of Fuggles with 10 minutes left in the boil. So you have 15 grams of Fuggles and 10 grams of Magnum for the entire 20-minute boil, and then 21 grams, which is about 3/4 of an ounce of Fuggles added with 10 minutes left, and that was it. When the boil was complete, I chilled the wort to 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19 C with my Jaded Brewing Scylla immersion chiller before taking a refractometer reading that showed the wort was at my target 1050 OG. I couldn't believe it. That seemed pretty high to me.
Dang, yeah, I'm pretty impressed that you got it from that grist bill, that you got all the way up to 1050 from that. Just a 25-minute mash rest.
Yeah, well, I wasn't planning for it to do as well as it did. According to the BJCP, 1046 is kind of the ceiling for the recommended OG for an Irish Red Ale. The fact I got 1050 was pretty impressive. What would you think that might contribute to this beer? Could it still taste like an Irish Red Ale?
Yeah, it could absolutely still taste like an Irish Red, but I'm wondering, and we'll see whenever we get to the results, I'm wondering, because you fermented it like 150, or not fermented, mashed at 155, which is, going to favor some of those dextrins, and, and now you've got a higher OG. I wonder if it's going to really dry out, or if you're going to have like a residual sweetness in there that might make it cloying or something. So I'm interested to see what happens.
Yeah, that was my thought too. As I was looking at this, when I get this question all the time about short and shoddy. Well, what's your brew house efficiency? How big of a hit do you take? I calculate all of my short and shoddy batches at 64% efficiency. This one came back at 68% efficiency, which is about 3 points less than what I get doing a standard 60-minute mash. So I was pretty impressed with this one. And again, hey, 1050 OG, I'll take it. I'm fine with going a little outside of the bounds set by BJCP. So at this point, I racked that chilled wort to a Spidell fermenter, one of those 7-gallon Spidell plastic or PET fermenter, or HDPE, I believe, fermentation vessels. I then pitched a single pouch of Imperial yeast to A10 Darkness, which is I believe, sourced from Guinness. And then it was off to the races from there. I didn't make a starter. I didn't do a vitality starter or anything like that. I just pitched directly one pouch into that 5.5, 6 gallons of wort. I then placed that filled fermenter in my chamber, which was controlled to 76 degrees Fahrenheit or 24 degrees C. Now, it was March, so the weather outside was fairly cool already, and I'd already, I figured it'd be interesting to see what might happen if fermentation was left uncontrolled. I went and checked on it every day, and I think the warmest it got was about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is, 22 degrees C, 21 degrees C, something like that. So it wasn't too bad. Would it increase the esters or not though?
Yeah, I don't think so. But maybe. I mean, that's a 66 to 70, but that's a really cool strategy too. And we didn't talk about that. It's not something that's particularly specific to Irish red ales, but that tradition of starting it at whatever temperature, like 66F, and just letting it go. That's a very traditional thing to do in the UK, right? Or at least my understanding. It's just sort of let the beer go until it's done fermenting. I mean, you're going to get some heat. It's going to raise its temperature just because of what's going on with the yeast. But letting it go a little bit is not really a problem. And maybe it does produce a little bit of esters. We'll see. But I'd be kind of surprised if, that small of a temperature difference caused a huge difference in the ester production.
Yeah, fermentation is exothermic, meaning that it creates heat. It's as you ferment, the temperature of that beer is going to rise a bit. I expected it to rise about 6 degrees Fahrenheit, which I believe is about 2-3 degrees C. It didn't do that. It went about 4 degrees Fahrenheit max, at least based on when I would check on it. And I was looking at it during active fermentation. So yeah, that's what I did. Now, usually I do control, I just keep it controlled to 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19 C in the chamber. But this was short and shoddy. I wanted to see what would happen. So at this point, I took a look at my watch. It was 12:42 p.m., meaning that this entire brew day from collecting the water to getting the fermentation vessel in the chamber was 1 hour and 57 minutes. Probably a good half hour less than what I spent brewing that very first batch of extract Irish red ale.
Listeners, does anybody else just sigh and groan whenever Marshall talks about how it only took him 2 days or 2 hours to do this brew day? Or maybe you have just thrown out all of your, just thrown it out the traditional brewing practices and you're doing short and shoddy like Marshall. But man, I just feel like every time I hear that, I'm just like, ugh, how nice would it be to brew a beer in just 2 hours? So hey, maybe we should start brewing experiments short and shoddy. No, I'm just kidding. I'd never do that. But
well, one of the things about it is oh man, 2 hours, that's it. It is hectic. I mean, you know that there are 7 or 8 different things that you really have to focus on and do on a brew day. When you squeeze that, when you take that from a 2.5 or 3 hour brew day and you squeeze it into or a 3.5 to 4 hour brew day and you squeeze it into 2 hours or less, you're moving around the entire time. You've got multiple timers set. I've kind of gotten used to it, but I'll tell you, the first few short and shoddy brew days that I did I was like, oh, I'm gonna forget to do something. It's funny stories. As a little side story, Paul Amico, who's been doing the Hop Chronicles, brewing all of those, and those are brewed using normal standard practices. He wanted to brew up a short and shoddy, and so he did that recently. And he texted me, and he was like, "How do you even manage to take photos of your brew day?" He's like, "I was moving around so much." So it is hectic. I think a lot of people, what they enjoy about brewing is that it's something to kick back and do while you're relaxing and drinking beers, maybe hanging out with friends. That is not what a short and shoddy brew day is. That certainly was not what this under sub 2 hour brew day was. But it worked out for me, and I was excited to see the next morning when fermentation was kicking off very actively. Again, fresh yeast will do that, especially when you're pitching high, cell counts that you get in the pouches from imperial yeast. And then after a week, activity had subsided, so I took a hydrometer measurement showing that the beer finished at a slightly higher than desired 1019 FG for a total 4.1% ABV. So that ABV was smack on right where I like it to be, kind of in that 4 to 4.5% range. But that FG was a lot, a bit higher than, 5 points higher than the ceiling recommended by BJCP.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, right? I was wondering that if the higher mash temperature, that higher efficiency that you got up to the 150 was going to play out. and see if you got like a higher finishing gravity. So I wonder, I'd be interested to see if it tastes. I mean, I'm not offended by 1019 on an Irish red ale. I think it can work, especially your alcohol's down a little bit, so that won't contribute that sort of like alcohol sweetness to it as well. So maybe I'm interested to see.
Yeah, well, and the thing about higher FG, at this point when I was brewing this beer, we'd already done multiple mash temp experiments showing that high FG is not necessarily correlated with perceptibly sweet beer. A lot of people still believe that, and that's okay, whatever. Really what I found is that FG is more a function of the, the level of alcohol that you have is more controlled by FG than it is the perceptible sweetness is what I'm trying to say. And so I wasn't terribly concerned by this. Ideally, that OG would have been lower and that FG would have been lower, but it was, if you kept them kind of locked onto each other and moved it up and down, I was happy with at least the attenuation that I got. And again, that 4.1% ABV was money. So I wasn't terribly concerned. I let the beer sit another couple of days before taking a second hydrometer measurement that did confirm 1019 FG was the stopping point. And that's when I swapped the airlock for a CO2 filled balloon, which we call a balloon lock. And I dropped the temperature in the chamber to 34 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree C. I returned the following day and fined with gelatin, which mingled with the beer for yet another day before I racked it to a CO2 purged keg that was placed in my keezer and burst carbonated for 18 hours. A lot of people will say, oh, you purged your keg. That's not short and shoddy. This is short and shoddy brewing. This is not trying to produce a crappy beer. So that I don't know how else to get that across. I don't like oxidized beer. Okay. I'm a preacher of it. I'm a believer that cold side oxidation is real and I try to avoid it at all costs. So I then reduced the gas to serving pressure and I let the beer condition in my keezer for 5 more days. That's it. About a week before serving it to tasters for evaluation. What do you think, man?
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say about the comment about the CO2 purge keg. I mean, if you've got a kegging system, you can purge your kegs.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's so easy to do. It's really easy to do. So I'm okay with that as short and shoddy, but dang, that beer looks so good. And on the website, you can see the picture of the beer. It's like right out in front of Marshall's pool. And I'm just like super jealous of thinking of him sitting here sipping this beer, like in 77-degree California weather. Although I know you're not on the coast, you're over in the desert. So it's hotter where you are. but yeah, I love that the way that beer looks. That beer, especially in that photo, looks exactly like what I remember from drinking Irish red ales in Europe, in both Ireland and Spain and throughout Europe. That it looks fantastic.
This beer was, in my opinion, gorgeous. It was so clear. Now, I've had it, in my experience, sometimes you can find with gelatin and it doesn't seem to clear the beer. I think that can be due to one, the yeast that you're using, the yeast strain, but it can also be due to, polyphenols from hops and such. It's what we see with, even if you find a New England IPA. This beer was fermented with a notably, English-ish, it's an Irish strain, but from the UK, the darkness strain had very low hopping rate and it cleared up beautifully and very quickly through the use of gelatin fining. I was so happy with it. And I could not keep my hands off of it. I loved this beer so much. No question about it. The best Irish red ale that I've made, despite the fact that I cut so many corners in what is, viewed as being traditional brewing processes. Reduced mash length, reduced boil length. I set the, fermentation temperature to be a bit, well, it could rise up as high as it wanted to, up to 76F. I got a nice, that kind of peanut-like malt flavor that I get from Maris Otter was definitely there. It definitely had kind of a dry, crackery thing that I suppose is from the blend of malts, but possibly from that Metolius from Mecca grade. The earthier Fuggles hops definitely came through, but not to the point that you thought, oh, this is a hoppy beer. I felt like I got some fruity ester character. I'm not entirely sure if that wasn't also from the malt, and it was so low that it just melded well with the entire beer. I 100% would brew this Irish red ale again exactly as I did it. It was so delicious.
Yeah, I mean, it looks fantastic. And from hearing that description, if that's what tasters tasted on this beer too, I mean, that would make me really excited to have this level, to be able to brew an Irish red ale in 2 hours and have it taste that good.
It was good, man. I thought it was. Well, I did serve it to 15 blind tasters. Now, this was done before we switched the survey to telling tasters what the style was. And so they had no idea going into it what it was. We'll talk in a minute about, I try to get them to guess what style it is, but we later learned that people just don't know styles as much as us nerds do. And so we removed that question. Again, 15 tasters. Participants were not informed of the style, so keep that in mind. In terms of how hoppy, malty, and dry the beer was, tasters seemed to perceive the strongest characteristics as being the beer's maltiness, which yielded an average rating of about 3.4 out of 5. Right behind that was how dry the beer was, with a rating of about 2.9 out of 5. So not necessarily a terribly dry beer, just that dryness was more characterfully noticed than hoppiness, which you would totally expect. The hop rating came in at about 1.3 out of 5. This to me is exactly what I would expect for an Irish red ale.
Yeah, totally. Mostly malty, slightly dry, and the hops just kind of, hanging out in the background. Absolutely. I mean, that sounds like great taster, or sounds like tasters agree with hopefully what the beer should taste like.
Exactly. And which is impressive for them not knowing what the style is, because when you're kind of biased a little bit, to maybe rate what you're expecting. I mean, we all do that. So in terms of, we broke those characteristics down by hop, malt, yeast, and yeast. And so in terms of hop character, 7 out of those 15 tasters rated earthy hop character as being the most prominent. 2 tasters each ranked fruity and floral, and then 1 person each rated spicy, pine resinous, and dank caddy. I'm with the people who rated earthy. I mean, that's what I get from Fuggles in general, so I was completely biased in my own summation of this, but that is what I got from this beer, and I thought it just worked really well.
Yeah, and it's hard sometimes to distinguish hop character from like esters and aroma. So, earthy, fruity, floral being the top 3, that could have been some, yeast esters coming through that people perceived as hop characteristics, but earthy in this, fantastic, and especially 7 out of 15.
Yeah, and in my experience, if you use if you go a little heavier handed with Fuggles, you can get kind of a almost like orange blossom floral character from it, and so I don't think that's what these people were picking up, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was a little bit of that in there. In terms of malt character, 4 out of 15 tasters each ranked toasty and nutty. So that was 8 total. 4 going toasty, 4 going nutty. That's perfect to me. 8 out of 15, picking those 2, exactly what I'd expect from an Irish red ale. 3 each ranked cracker bread crust and caramel sweet, and then 1 person put roast. All of those make sense to me. I didn't necessarily pick up much of a roasty note, but I could see toasty, nutty, cracker bread crust, and caramel sweet being, noticeable, perceptibly there in this beer.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about peanut butter toast, right? I mean, I think that was the description that you mentioned in the top of the show about an Irish red ale, and yeah, I mean, if those were what the tasters tasted, I mean, that means essentially every taster tasted in the range of what you wanted in an Irish red ale. So I would think this is as on the money as you can get, in my opinion. We're looking at those malt characteristics, and again, for being a short and shoddy beer, to get that level of malt characteristics, I think is also just really impressive.
Yeah, thank you. I was pretty happy with it. In terms of yeast character, 6 people rated esters, and another 6 people rated is clean. So that's 12 out of 15 already. 2 people put phenolic. I don't know where that came from. And then 1 person noted a sulfur character to the fermentation piece. And again, those 2 I just don't get. That was 3 of the 15 people. Otherwise, you're looking at esters and clean. And I would probably, if I was taking this survey, I would have probably rated clean because it was very clean, very nice malt character, but it was fermented with darkness, which I guess can impart slight esters to the beer.
Yeah, exactly. And you talked about using Fuggles, and if that added any of that fruitiness to it, not citrus, but like you said, orange blossom. If that added that could also come across as esters. But looking at this, right? So 12 tasters between esters and clean. What that tells me is the people that did taste esters, they were probably not very perceptible. You have such a high percentage of clean. The people that did taste esters were probably picking out something that most of the other tasters weren't able to pick out. And so that, I mean, to me, that sounds, again, like you've sort of nailed the, general profile of an Irish red ale. It's so interesting too. These tasters not knowing the style and getting as close as you can to that style in a 2-hour brew day. Just impressive.
Yeah. And then so at this point in the survey, we reveal what the style is. Again, the survey is not like this anymore, but at that time, we revealed what the style was, gave them a description of it, and then asked them to rate on a scale of 0 to 5 how well the beer that they're drinking represents the style based on that description. 0 people rated it a 5 out of 5. I believe it's called the halo effect. That's kind of normal. People don't like to rate the extremes. So 0 people gave it a 5 out of 5, but 7 out of 15 people rated it a 4 out of 5, and another 5 people gave it a 3 out of 5. So I thought that was pretty telling that 12 people gave it a 3 out of 5 or higher. Seems like this is a decent representation of an Irish red ale. Another 3 people rated it 2 out of 5, and then there were no 1 or 0 ratings. So.
Yeah, this is another one of those examples. I wish I could have a conversation with the tasters and see what they meant, right? I want to follow up. I want to do a second survey and be like, okay, why was it not representative of the style? What specifically took it out of style for you?
Yeah.
And I think that would be really cool. Maybe we could consider adding that at some point. That's probably too difficult and way too many variables there. But yeah, I mean, still, you've got what, 12 at a 3 or a 4, so they're saying it's sort of an average, but there was also, you also asked the tasters, whether they liked the beer,
right.
How much they liked the beer. And those results were crazy high. Five people said that they liked the beer extremely, right? They loved the beer. And then, 3 said that it was a 4, and then another 5 that said it was a 3. So you had, 13 out of the 15 tasters said that they loved that beer.
Yeah, it's always surprising to me when people like something that I've made. I feel like no matter how long I've been doing this, it just feels good to hear that people enjoy something that you produced. This was one of those beers that pretty much everyone I shared it with was like, man, give me another pint of that stuff. And I like I said, I couldn't keep my hands off of it. I'd come home from work, I'd pour myself one of my 9-ounce half pints and go sit out in my backyard with the fan on during it was a beautiful spring day and just enjoy this delicious and beautiful looking beer. Only 2 people rated it a 2 out of 5, and then nobody rated it a 1 or a 0 out of 5. So I thought that was pretty impressive as well. And overall, my thought was that this was a surprisingly good example of an Irish red ale, and based on the blind taster feedback, it seems to corroborate that as well. That this was, despite all the corners cut, despite using Metolius Munich style malt in there, despite all the things that I did off, that this beer turned out really well. Now, one thing we didn't talk about yet was nobody noted any off flavors. No diacetyl. There was nothing off about this beer, despite those the short and shoddy methods that I use. So again, just more evidence showing that you may not have to do everything as you were taught. 60 minutes here, 60 minutes there, and you can get away with making a pretty decent beer.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds like it. Like you said, the tasters didn't know anything about the style, and they nailed all of the flavor descriptors that we've been talking about for Irish red ales. So I mean, yeah, you definitely have some flexibility within this style, and I think that's a great thing. Maybe that is one of the reasons why people start with Irish red ales, or so many people start with that ales, because it is sort of very forgiving of those, of those things like water chemistry and like mash temperature and fermentation temperature and all that sort of stuff. It's just a very forgiving style that sort of accepts all of those, parameters that may not be exactly perfect.
Exactly. Well, we did get some reader comments, not too many. We're going to go through a few here. First one comes from Herbert Bowers, who says, "Why did you use Imperial Darkness? It seems more like a stout yeast." My response to that one, I'm curious what you have to say about this, Cade. There's no such thing as a, quote, stout yeast or a red ale yeast. You can use whatever yeast you want, and if it produces a beer that you enjoy that is within the parameters of the style, then by all means, get away with it. Yes, Darkness was apparently sourced from Guinness, but they use it to make different styles, not just their dark stout. And yeast is yeast. It's English in origin, so it may very well produce different esters than a cleaner American yeast. But I saw nothing wrong with using Darkness in this one.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think in the episode of the Brew Lab with Maria Mutsoglu, we were talking about testing different versions of yeast to put in your beer, and one of the big comments that we had in there was if the yeast adds adds something to the beer that you want in the beer, it doesn't matter what style or where it came from, right? If you want a peach stone fruit ester in a pale ale, you can use an English strain of yeast, right? Or in an American pale ale, you can use an English yeast strain. You don't have to use Chico all the time. And then, the other comment I would have about that too is there's a reason why we talk about people having house yeast strains, right? I mean, Imperial has a strain that's called house, but a lot of breweries, Bell's has the house yeast, Sierra Nevada has a house, yeast. And that's because they can brew a whole bunch of different styles with that yeast. So yeast is very much not agnostic to style, right? You can put yeast in a whole bunch of things. And I like darkness, especially, honestly, darkness might be more traditional than most other yeasts. I mean, I don't know where Irish, ale yeast comes from White Labs. That's the other one that I've used. I don't know where it's sourced, but I could certainly see somebody pitching yeast from Guinness in an Irish red ale.
I've used darkness in I believe it's a blonde ale. Came out beautiful. So,
that'd be great.
I like how you said yeast is agnostic. It's not, it's not just for one style. So branch out a little bit, try new things. Next comment comes from Reddit user Darth Tagnan, who said, I've been doing back-to-back abbreviated brews with 30-minute mash and 30-minute boils in a range of styles with great success. I factor in 70% efficiency and typically hit numbers with ease. It's the only way to brew as much beer in one day with my limited amount of free time these days.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I was, I'm mostly brewing Brewlosophy experiment batches these days. I don't do a lot of the other batches, just sort of like for personal consumption or short and shoddy. But man, if I was doing just personal consumption beers, I got to be honest, I don't want to spend 4 or 5 hours in the brewery every week. I mean, I like it because I get to hang out with people, but I would love to just do a 2-hour brew day, once or twice a month or something. That would just be so fantastic. And especially when it turns out really well like this, I mean, we've seen a number of examples. I think there's been only 1 or 2 or 3 that have just been none that have been objectively bad, but 1 or 2 or 3 that were outside of the style guidelines in a not good way, right?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a few that I dumped, that didn't turn out really well. I think one of them was an American pale ale that was just, or maybe it was an IPA, I forget, but it didn't turn out well. But there are other reasons for that I don't think go back to, abbreviating the brew day necessarily. It's the use of old hops and stuff like that. So my comment to Darth Tagnan kind of goes along with what I'm going to say to this next commenter, Unoriginal Use from Reddit, who said, how the hell do you manage to get any reasonable conversion with just a 25-minute mash? Most of the conversion that takes place, it takes place in the first 15 to 20 minutes. And that's why I kind of pegged 25 minutes as my mash length. Nowadays I do 30 minutes, but the only reason I do that is because it gives me a little bit more time. It's a little bit less stressful on the brew day. My experience with speaking specifically of the mash rest length is that if you go 25 to 30 minutes, you're going to get probably 90 to 95% of the conversion that you would get if you were doing a 60-minute mash. And that may be, based on whatever your system allows, So if you normally get 68% and you want to do it with a 60-minute mash and you want to do a 30-minute mash, maybe calculate 65% that one time, give or take a couple of points. That's been my experience. Where if I were to abandon a short and shoddy approach, it would probably be the boil, though I still do a lot of short boils, only because I don't like throwing a bunch of vegetal matter in my beer, and so or into the wort during the boil. And so an extended boil allows you to use less hops and still get to get the same amount of bitterness. If I'm doing like this Irish red ale, I had to kind of add an extra magnum to get the bitterness that I wanted because I didn't want to use a ton of Fuggles at 30 minutes out of concern that it was going to contribute too much hop character to the beer. So that's the boil length is really the one that I concern myself with more. But not because of DMS or anything like that. It's just bitterness.
Yeah, and the other thing about mash length too is you have to have you don't have to dial in the other factors, but if your mill is out of sync or something, if you've got bigger kernels or stuff in there, you're going to get reduced efficiency.
Yeah.
So having a nice brew in the bag system where you're stirring the mash fairly frequently, breaking up dough balls, milling really fine where the water and enzymes have easy access to those sugars, no reason why you can't do a 20 to 25 minute mash, right? Those things can happen really quickly. Where you get into more troublesome areas is if you have bigger grain clumps.
Yeah.
Right. If you didn't mill as finely, if you've got really coarse grain, then, the 20 to 25 minutes is just not going to be enough. And you're going to get, like you said, like a 45 or a 50% efficiency instead of, 68, which you got in this one. So there's a whole bunch of factors that go into that. But a shortened mash and especially a shortened boil, I got to think that those things are going to really start to take a higher prominence as we move into, valuing our time more and more. And as we talk about these, diversions from traditional methods like short and shoddy.
Yeah, no, very well put. And this has been said for years. This is not an original idea, but the getting 55% efficiency literally means maybe an extra pound at most of base malt to get you up to where you want to be OG wise. So what? I mean, that is maybe $1.20, and if you're buying it in bulk, it's way less than that. I don't know why people chase efficiency, but surprisingly, even with the short and shoddy method, I've been able to get, right around what I was getting using other methods. So I'm pleased with short and shoddy, and I'm very pleased with the way this Irish Red Ale turned out. Cade, I do think that about covers Irish Red Ale for us. Do you have anything else before we finish up?
No, I really want to go brew one of these now. Maybe I'm going to brew one this summer. I need to come up with a way to get this into my kegerator. I haven't had a good Irish ale in a long time, and it's time for one. Maybe I can find one at the bottle shop. I'm going to go find one. I'm going to drink an Irish ale this week.
Absolutely. And if anybody else out there wants to make an Irish Red Ale, have one on tap or in bottles, hey, consider cutting some time off of your brew day and doing it like this. It worked out well for me. All right, please remember to subscribe to our new podcast, The Brew Lab, so you're notified when new episodes drop. And don't forget, you can click the link in the description of this episode to read all about this short and shoddy Irish Red Ale. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.